Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to discuss the difference between shadow work and inner healing. Now, both of these are important topics on this channel, and they sometimes overlap, but they're also different enough that it can get confusing. Now, this term was actually coined by famous psychologist Carl Jung. Ultimately, the goal of shadow work is to become more whole by integrating our shadow into our conscious personality, dialogue with the shadow, reflection, regulating our emotions, unresolved grief. Here's the thing. Shadow work often reveals the hidden source of pain, because you're bringing up these repressed emotions like anger, fear, or shame, and you're acknowledging them head-on, while inner healing is more about soothing, restoring, and balancing. So, the tone of shadow work is usually pretty deep, raw, and revealing, while the tone of inner healing is gentler, healing, and supportive. Shadow work can be very eye-opening, and it often leads to insights about who we are and why we do what we do, while inner healing is more about actually feeling the emotions, releasing them, and then embodying more of our true essence. For example, while inner healing is more intuitive and embodied, since it involves working with our body and our emotions. But ultimately, both shadow work and inner healing are equally important, and they complement each other perfectly. If you're doing shadow work and you bring up a part of yourself like anger, well, this could be the first time you've allowed yourself to acknowledge and accept this anger, but you might notice that there's a lot of pain associated with it too. When this happens, this is where inner healing comes in. Inner healing helps you to soothe, reparent, or release this pain. Shame, trauma, anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, codependency, abandonment, rejection, betrayal, and many others, and ultimately rebuilding our sense of safety. Shadow work helps us become more aware of our hidden wounds, while inner healing helps us to soothe and release them. Think of it this way. Shadow work equals look at the wound, while inner healing equals clean and care for the wound. So, they work together in a beautiful way to help us heal and grow. And emotional freedom. It's about creating more space for love, joy, peace, creativity, or expression to flow through us again. Some tools used in inner healing include inner child work, forgiveness work, Ho'oponopono, or other self-love practices, nervous system healing, somatic experiencing, journaling, therapy, or meditation, dream analysis, active imagination, and taking personality tests like the Enneagram or Myers-Briggs. This is because anything we disown or reject becomes projected onto those around us. Let's talk about inner healing. What is inner healing? Well, inner healing is a much broader process than shadow work. It's a process of healing any sort of emotional, spiritual, or psychological wounds that stem from our past experiences. These wounds could come from childhood trauma, toxic family systems, toxic conditioning, or really any sort of challenging experience we've had in life that we never fully processed or healed from. So, for example, if you reject your own anger, you might get really triggered by someone else's anger. Or if you reject your own neediness, you might get triggered by someone else's neediness. The problem is that when we project these things onto other people, we then judge them for having these qualities, when really we're just seeing our own shadow being reflected back to us. So, the goal of shadow work is to stop this pattern of projection and instead integrate these rejected parts of ourselves so we can take responsibility for them, acknowledge them, accept them, and ultimately love ourselves even more fully. He believed that each of us have a shadow, which is made up of repressed emotions, thoughts, feelings, and traits that we've either denied, rejected, or suppressed within ourselves because they don't feel good. In other words, our shadow is made up of all the parts of us that we've disowned. This could include anger, envy, guilt, fear, shame, arrogance, neediness, or even sexual desire. These are all examples of repressed material. So, I thought it would be helpful to explain each one individually. And then at the end of this video, I'll share what the relationship is between them and how they work together. So first, let's talk about shadow work. What is shadow work? Now, the purpose of shadow work is to bring this unconscious material into our awareness so we can acknowledge it, accept it, and ultimately reclaim these parts of ourselves. Some tools used in shadow work include journaling. Next, inner healing is about soothing this inner pain. Here's a list of some of the wounds that can be healed through this inner healing process. So, now that you understand the difference between shadow work and inner healing, you might be wondering, how do they work together? Well, so to summarize, here are some additional points to consider. Shadow work tends to be more intense. Some people might think that shadow work is more logical or intellectual since it involves understanding our psychology and our shadow.